The President. Questions. Question 1, Mr. Frederick Fung. Mr. President, regarding the effective utilization of the television channels and future development of domestic free television program services, hereinafter referred to as free TV, as well as the vetting of applications for free TV licenses, will the government inform this council? A. Given that the audience ratings of the programs of one of the two existing free TV broadcasters have all along been low, whether the authorities have recently assessed if there is poor utilization of television channels at present, the impact of such situation on the sustainable development of free TV, and if the two licensees have made efforts in promoting local creativity and program diversity. If they have, of the assessment results, what measures they will take to enhance the utilization of the television channels, and if they will consider revoking the license concerned or retendering some of the channels. If they will not retender the channels, of the reasons for that. B. Given the report that an applicant for the free TV license has indicated that, despite the overwhelming public support for introducing new free TV, the government has not yet completed the vetting of applications, and that the applicant has been waiting for more than 1,000 days for the result of the application, whether the authorities can list those previous projects, the vetting of which has also taken such a long time, whether they have assessed the impact of such a long vetting time on the future development of free TV, and if the long vetting time will give investors an impression that the government is exceedingly bureaucratic and inefficient, thus affecting investors' interest in investing in Hong Kong in future and undermining the competitiveness of Hong Kong, and C, what mechanism is in place to ensure that the vetting of applications for TV licenses will not be subject to political considerations and political interference, and to avoid the authorities responsible for vetting the applications putting unreasonable demands on the applicants and existing licensees taking legal actions to delay the vetting process. Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development. Thank you, Mr. President. The government has always attached great importance to the development of the broadcasting industry. Our broadcasting policy is to promote sustainable development of the local broadcasting industry and encourage fair competition, investment, and adoption of innovation technologies, thereby leading to the provision of more choices of quality programs to the public. Under the new technology-neutral regime enshrined in the Broadcasting Ordinance Cap 562 enacted in 2000, TV program services are regulated according to their characteristics and pervasiveness rather than their transmission mode, and licensees are free to adopt their own transmission means to deliver their TV services. Indeed, we have all along adopted a liberalized, light-handed, and pro-competition regulatory approach. As a result, Hong Kong boasts a vibrant broadcasting industry and a multitude of TV and radio channels with diversified programming. My reply to the three-part question is as follows. Hong Kong is a pluralistic society. Members of the public have diverse demands for TV programs. Since the variety and quality of TV programs are determined by a combination of factors, including selection of materials and program production, there can hardly be any absolutely objective benchmark in this respect. Viewership ratings are not the only indicator for assessing the variety and quality of TV programs. Regarding the variety of TV programs, the two existing free TV licensees are required under the license to provide a diversity of programs to meet the needs of different viewers. In particular, they are required to broadcast a minimum amount of educational, informational, and locally produced programs, and carry programs produced by Radio Television Hong Kong, RTHK, during prime time. After the midterm review of the domestic free TV program service licenses of Asia Television Limited ATV and Television Broadcasting to TVB in 2010, the former Broadcasting Authority BA, the predecessor of the Communications Authority CA, recommended that enhanced program requirements should be imposed on the two free television broadcasters. The former BA's recommendations were subsequently accepted by the Chief Executive in Council. These enhanced requirements serve to address the public's demand for locally produced programs as well as the public's call for more educational, informational, and RTHK programs. Furthermore, the CE in Council approved during the above-mentioned midterm review the former BA's recommendation to engage the public to collect their views on the quality and variety of programs provided by the two TV broadcasters. The first such exercise was conducted in 2011. Through various channels, the organizations were invited from different sectors of the community to give their views on the quality and variety of free TV programs, and over 150 submissions had been received. The former BA also conducted focus group discussions, inviting participation of professionals, representatives of concerned groups, and members of the public of different age groups, so as to listen to their views on the quality of the two TV broadcasters. The representatives also joined the discussion to directly listen to the public views. Subsequently, the former BA sent the views collected in the public engagement exercise to ATV and TVB, both of which have responded to the views and taken follow-up actions. The public engagement activities will be held regularly to enable the free TV licensees to listen directly to public views. The CA will also continue to monitor the licensees' performance, expecting them to take into account public views in producing programs and formulating program strategies, so that their broadcasting services will better meet the expectations and needs of the public. As regards revocation of license, any such cases will be dealt with in accordance with the relevant provisions of the Broadcasting Ordinance and established procedures. However, there is at present no evidence suggesting the need to revoke any of the existing free TV licenses. Under the BO, the CA shall consider applications for a free TV license and make recommendations thereon to the CE in Council. After considering the recommendations made out by the CA, the CE in Council may grant a domestic free TV program service license, subject to such conditions as he thinks fit specified in the license. The former BA earlier completed the assessment of 3 applications for domestic free TV licenses in accordance with the Broadcasting Ordinance and established procedures, taking into account various relevant factors, and make recommendations to the CE in Council on the 3 applications. The CE in Council is now processing the recommendations in a prudent manner. The outcome will be announced as soon as possible after a decision is made by the CE in Council. Since the enactment of the BO in year 2000, which sets out the prevailing broadcasting licensing regime, we have not granted any new domestic free TV program service license. In other words, there is hitherto no precedent case for us to advise on the time taken by the CE in Council to consider free TV license applications under the current licensing regime. We understand that both the applicants and the public would like to know the outcome of these applications as soon as possible, but the administration has to process all applications for TV licenses strictly in accordance with the BO and established procedures. The administration is obliged and required to process each application prudently in accordance with all relevant requirements. C. As I've said a number of times at the meetings of this Council, the guidance note for those interested in applying for domestic free TV program service licenses in Hong Kong, issued by the CA, sets out clearly the assessment criteria, which includes the applicant's financial soundness and commitment to investment, the applicant's managerial skills and technical expertise, the variety, quantity, and quality of programs to be provided, the technical soundness and quality of the proposed service, the speed of service rollout, minimum inconvenience to members of the public, the benefit to the local broadcasting industry, viewers, and the economy as a whole, and quality control and compliance. The CE in Council will take into account all relevant factors and be guided by public interest in deciding on the applications. As I've also previously explained to this Council, the administration has been processing the recommendations submitted by the former Broadcasting Authority expeditiously and prudently in accordance with the statutory requirements and established procedures. I believe that the most appropriate course of action for the administration is to continue to follow this established mechanism and handle these 3 applications in strict compliance with the procedures and the law. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Fung. Mr. President, the application has waited for more than 1,000 days, that means more than 2 years and 8 months. I recall that even the airport was able to be built within 1,000 days before the handover. Why is it that 10,000 days have been taken before any decision has been made on the application? Because you're depriving the public's enjoyment of the free usage of free TV programs on air. Why has the administration taken 1,000 days? Secretary, as I mentioned in my main reply, I understand that the public would like to know the outcome as soon as possible, but we need to abide by the established procedures in vetting applications. We need to vet each application in accordance with the established procedure. In particular, the free TV applications will have a profound impact on the local broadcasting industry, and the CN Council will need to consider a basket of factors as mentioned in my main reply. And this is the 5th time I answer members' question in this regard since the beginning of this year. And I stress that we will expeditiously process the application as soon as possible. He hasn't answered my question. He kept talking about established procedure. Please repeat your question. He hasn't answered my question. He said that everything has to count on the established procedure. He uses this established procedure to answer my question. So what is the established procedure? Why has it taken more than 1,000 days? Secretary. Now for the basket of factors for consideration and the established procedures. As I said, this is the 5th time I attend the Council to answer questions. And the established procedures also include due process and legal matters, and we will try to expeditiously vet the applications prudently as soon as possible. Mr. Chan Chi-chun. Mr. President, Secretary kept repeating that the three TV license applications are being processed, and it is not appropriate to disclose the details. However, the public is concerned whether the applications will be turned down in the end, and some applicants have actually started to contemplate the idea of withdrawing the application. So, has the administration considered rejecting all 3 applications in one go, and under such circumstances, will they decide to cancel the granting of licenses? Secretary. The applications are being processed, and I repeat, the CE in Council is in the process of vetting the applications of the 3 applicants, and we have not considered cancelling the granting of license. Mr. Yip Kin-yun. Mr. President, regarding Mr. So's reply, it is said that the administration should stick to the appropriate course of action, which is to continue to follow the established mechanism and handle the 3 applications in strict compliance with the procedures and the law. But we emphasize that even if it's in strict compliance with the procedures and the law, 1,000 days have been taken, and this is the 5th time the Secretary is attending this Council. And in the written reply, it said that the former Broadcasting Authority has put forward recommendations to the CN Council. I'd like to know when this recommendation was made. And over the past months, would the administration brief this Council on what exactly this established procedure means? I remind members that for the supplementary question, it should only include 1 question. Secretary. Thank you, member, for the question. As far as the procedure is concerned, there hasn't been any delay. We have tried to expeditiously and prudently vet the applications. And on many occasions, I've explained in this Council that we need to abide by sections 8, 9, and 10 of the Broadcasting Ordinance, and that is the Broadcasting Authority, that is the predecessor of the Communications Authority, must make a recommendation to the CN Council for further processing. And this is the procedure that we're talking about. The procedure is complex. And as I said, we need to comply with the established procedures. And when I answered questions in this council, I've already cited the basket of factors to be considered, and these will be taken into account. Your question hasn't been answered. Mr. So actually hasn't answered any of my two questions. When was the recommendation made? Can the Secretary tell us the date? Secretary. Now, the former BA's recommendation was submitted to CN Council in July last year, 2011. Ms. Claudia Mo.
There's this popular understanding that there are political considerations involved in this issue, such as that any applicant would need to be politically obedient, correct, or ideologically acceptable to Beijing. Now, I'm not going to ask you that particular question because you're going to parrot your answer once again. My question is, it's understood that your bureau has been terribly worried about legal proceedings against the government taken out by the existing free-to-air television license holders. And the fact that apparently was that you've already got official legal advice that if the government uses public interest, you would go scot-free. You would win any such.
Ms. Claudia Mo, please ask your question.
Could you inform this council, is the above true? Thank you.
Secretary.
Honorable member for mentioning, for asking this question, allowing me the opportunity to explain once again that political consideration is not part of the factor to be considered in this application. I have said it time and again that these consideration has been laid out in the guideline and in the applicable legislation. Political consideration is not part of it. As to whether what will be considered in EXCO in the discussion, other than what I've told you, because of the confidential nature of the way EXCO is conducted, I am not at liberty to disclose what has been discussed.
Mr. Ronnie Tong. Mr. President, Secretary just now emphasized that this is the 5th time he's attending the council to give this answer, but this answer is the same every time. Now, in the past 2 years, one of the dominating TV stations have said that if another license is granted, this will make the station not profitable. So can the Secretary tell us in this council, in taking so much time in considering the granting of license, has there been any influence by the interference or the obstruction by this TV station? Or else, why has the administration taken so long in vetting the application? Secretary. As I said in the main reply, our policy is to encourage competition and to offer more choices for members of the public. Of course, we need to abide by the legal framework and process the applications in line with the established procedures. So we will consider all the relevant factors. And in doing so, of course, we need to abide by the law as well. Your question hasn't been answered. It's a simple question. It hasn't been answered. My question is, is it because of the objection from a dominating TV station that the administration has dragged on its feet? Either the answer is no or you don't know. Secretary, Mr. Tong should know very well that in the broadcasting industry, if we talk about market dominance, there is relevant legislation in dealing with this issue. And this is not one of the factors for considering these 3 license applications. Of course, in providing more choices for members of the public and for the benefit of the local broadcasting industry as a whole, it is also one of the factors. My question hasn't been answered. Secretary, can you give us a brief answer, yes or no? Now, the deliberations of the CE in Council cannot be disclosed here. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Charles Mok. Mr. President, I understand that the administration, the Secretary has attended the Council many times for this question. And in your answer, you said that the CE in Council is vetting this application. And on the 17th of October, when I asked a question in this regard, you never said that it will go back to. It will not go back to the Bureau. And during a seminar in the Chinese University, the CS4A said that regarding the relevant policy, the government is dealing with that. So I'd like to know where. At what stage the matter is going through, whether it's at the Bureau or at the EXCO level. As I said very clearly, the applications are being vetted by the CE in Council at the moment, and our Bureau offers technical support to the CE in Council. So is it the case that the Chief Secretary for Administration has misunderstood the matter? I'm sorry, I think the Secretary has already answered your question. Dr. Kwat, well, the delay in granting the license has caused a lot of concerns, and it's also unfair to investors. Some are worried that there are political considerations involved, and some are also worried that it will hinder market competition. So can the government do something to alleviate these concerns? Secretary, Mr. President, I explained time and again that we need to abide by the legal requirements and the factors for considerations in vetting the applications. I understand the public would like to know the outcome as soon as possible, but we cannot circumvent the established procedures because of that. I emphasize that we are processing the applications in accordance with the relevant framework. We've spent over 20 minutes for this question.
Second question. Honorable Kenneth Leung. Thank you, Mr. President. It was uncovered earlier that there were unauthorized alterations in 2 properties owned by Harvest Charm Development Limited, in which the wife of the Secretary for Development had a stake, and that the properties had been used to operate subdivision of flats, commonly known as subdivided flats. Moreover, while the Secretary for Development has said that he and his wife do not hold any shares of the company at present, it has been reported that he might still have control over the company through 2 overseas registered companies. Some members of the committee have pointed out that the Secretary has a duty to tackle the problems of subdivided units and housing for members of the public. Yet the company in which his wife has a stake is suspected to have carried out unauthorized alterations and operate subdivided units. They are therefore concerned about whether the integrity checking mechanism for politically appointed officials, POs, and existing measures can effectively prevent conflicts of interests. In this connection, will the government inform this Council A whether it had conducted checking on the integrity and sources of assets of the candidates for nomination as Secretary for Development and the family members? It will head of the details of the checking mechanism, and whether checking was conducted on the mechanism on the candidates or their immediate family members to see if they were involved in unauthorized alterations in the operation of subdivided units, and whether they could pass the integrity checking when they were so involved. Whether the government had reviewed and improved the mechanism in the light of the aforesaid incident. if it has of the details. B. As it has been reported that the relatives of the Secretary for Development were engaged in investment activities of trading old buildings, and the Secretary needs to handle policies on urban renewal and land supply, whether the authorities have assessed if there are any loopholes in their measures to prevent conflicts of interest, and how they ensure that the private affairs of the various PAOs and their family members will not lead to conflicts of interest with the official duties consent. And C. Whether the existing declaration system requires the various PAOs to declare the shares in overseas registered companies indirectly held by them and their spouses, and to declare if they receive any bonuses from those companies. If so, of the details of the relevant declarations, and whether the government will take initiatives to ascertain if the relevant declarations are true, if it will not, of the reasons for that. Thank you. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. Mr. President, in response to recent media reports concerning the investment in old buildings by Harvest Charm Development Limited, the company for short, which the Secretary for Development's wife had a stake in the related discussions in the community, the Secretary for Development has explained the case to the society by issuing written statements, as well as meeting the media and responding to the inquiries since August this year. The Secretary for Development has never held any share of the company. The shares of the company held by his wife through an overseas registered company have all been sold already. In accordance with the Company Ordinance Cap 32, the relevant changes in shareholdings will be reflected in the 2013 annual return of the company. As a politically appointed official, PAO, the Secretary for Development must comply with the Code for Officials under the Political Appointment Mechanism, that is the PAO Code, which requires PAOs to avoid conflicts of interests. In the Secretary's statement issued in August, he has already undertaken that during his tenure as the Secretary for Development, he and his wife would not be involved in the Hong Kong property market except for personal usage. The administration will not further provide supplementary information and comment on this case. In consultation with the Chief Executive's Office and the relevant bureaus, I would like to respond to the remaining parts of the question raised by the Honorable Kenneth Leung on behalf of the administration as follows. A. All PAOs need to undergo extended checking. The administration will provide extended checking questionnaires to prospective candidates for nomination to become PAOs. The content of this questionnaire is the same as the one being used in the civil service. The subject undergoing extended checking needs to fill in his or her detailed personal particulars, education background, social activities, employment history, family members, etc. The subject also needs to nominate 2 referees to facilitate understanding of his or her background, work, family, and other relevant situations. The police are responsible for the checking. Inputs from other law enforcement agencies will be sought as necessary. The checking comprises interviews with the subject, his or her referees and supervisors, as well as record checks. The effectiveness of the extended checking system is based on trust and cooperation of all the parties involved. It is therefore essential to uphold strict confidentiality of the stipulated arrangement or case content or the relevant detailed information of the checking system. Part B. According to the requirements of the PAO Code, PAOs shall observe the highest standards of personal conduct and integrity at all times, ensure that there is no actual or potential conflict between his official duties and personal interests, avoid putting themselves in a position where they may arouse suspicion of dishonesty, unfairness, or conflict of interest, refrain from handling cases with actual or potential conflict of interest, and report to the CE any private interest that may influence or appear to influence the judgment in the performance of their duties. According to the requirements of the PAO Code, POs of all ranks shall declare their different kinds of investments and interests by filling in the prescribed form. The open parts of the declarations are placed on the websites of the respective offices or bureaus for public inspection. The relevant parts also require the POs to provide the names and occupations of their spouses. In the confidential parts of the declarations, POs of all ranks are required to provide the names of the organizations which the spouses work for. Apart from the above, POs as public officers will be prosecuted if found committing the common law offense of misconduct in public office. At the same time, they are regarded as prescribed officers under the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance, Cap 201. They are therefore subject to the relevant provisions in the POBO applicable to the prescribed officers. Section 2.2 of the POBO states that a person is soliciting or receiving an advantage if he or any other person acting on his behalf, directly or indirectly, demands, invites, asks for, or indicates willingness to receive any advantage, whether for himself or for any other person. To remind the POs, the relevant provision is included in the PO Code. Part C. The current declaration system requires POs of all ranks to declare their investment, shareholding, or direct or indirect interest in any company, their directorships, proprietorships, or partnerships in any company, and, if any specific details concerning their participation in any private company's affairs. They are also required to declare any investment or interest held by himself or herself, or in the name of his or her spouse, children, or other persons, agents, or companies, but are actually acquired on his or her account, or in which he or she has a beneficial interest. As mentioned in Part B of my reply, the names and occupations of the spouses or POs of all ranks are mandatory items to declare. POs of all ranks are responsible for ensuring that their declarations made according to the requirements of the PO Code are accurate. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Kenneth Leung. Thank you, Mr. President. For this PO Code, I would like to ask this question. I want to know whether it applies to the executive councillors as well. If it doesn't, do we have a mechanism to monitor the executive councillors? Secretary. Thank you, Mr. President. In relation to the question asked by Mr. Kenneth Leung, he would like to know about the PO Code. Well, in fact, in that particular code, it states very clearly that it applies to the POs, principal officials, the director of the CE's office, the political assistants, and the undersecretaries. If they are also EXCO members, then of course, in addition to the code, they must also abide by the declaration of interest system applicable to the EXCO members. If you permit, I can briefly talk about the declaration of interest on the part of the members of the EXCO members so as to answer his question. Well, according to the current system of declaration of interest, first of all, members have to declare land and property owned by members in or outside Hong Kong, including those used by themselves. They have to declare those held in the name of members' spouses, children, or other persons or companies but are actually owned by members, or those which are not owned by members but in which members have a beneficial interest. Also, members must, according to what they know, in relation to himself, his spouse, and the children or company, listed or otherwise, holding on their behalf, or other organizations which hold shares for them. And if it accounts for more than 1% of the issued share capital and they hold a beneficial interest, then the name must be given. And then more detailed financial interests have to be declared to the CE on a confidential basis. Moreover, EXCO members must, in relation to the member or his spouse, acceptance of sponsorship or gifts as a result of his capacity as such. And then when there is close or major interest, if known to the public, and in common sense, if it is received that the EXCO member's advice may have to do with his personal interest of relationship instead of being in the capacity of give unbiased advice, then he has to make a declaration as well. Mr. Chan Kin-po, it is said that all of them must be subject to the checking mechanism, but then members of the public are raising the standards expected of PO officials in relation to their integrity and conduct. Other than the POs themselves, their spouses are also under scrutiny, and the media has been writing such stories about such matters. Well, what about the background of the spouses of the POs? And do you understand adequately the commercial activities engaged by the PO's spouses so as to deal with the political time bomb? Secretary, as I have already said in my main reply, for the extended checking, of course, in the first place, the subject has to give information about his detailed personal particulars, education background, social activities, employment history, as well as his family members. Details have to be set out. In fact, the questionnaire itself runs to quite a length, and a lot of information has to be given. I've also mentioned that after filling out the form, after the form has been given to the administration, the police are responsible for the checking. It will carry it out independently and professionally. As I have said, the subject will be interviewed. His referees, supervisors are also interviewed. There will also be record checks. Relevant law enforcement agencies will also be invited to help if necessary. And as usual, there will be a very vigorous handling of the information. If necessary, there will be interviews and there will be record checks. Your question hasn't been answered. I was specific in my question, that is whether there will be extended checking in relation to the spouses. Secretary, for the extended checking questionnaire, family members would be mentioned, and of course, the spouse will be included. For information available for proper inspection, of course, we include the name and the occupation of the spouse. In the confidential part, the name of the organization that the spouse works for has to be declared as well. And the police, if necessary, will of course carry out checking into this matter. Mr. Sin Chung Kai, in the main reply, mention is made about the information to be given by the subject, but I don't think you include investment activities. They only have to give you details about the education background, social activities, and employment history, etc. But I'm sure you do include investment activities, so please clarify this point. And then, POs and spouses, I want to know whether you require them to declare any irregularities, including the subdivision of flats or illegal structures, illegal building works. Secretary, in my main reply, I've tried my best to talk about the extended checking questionnaires as well as the workflow. But as I have stated in the main reply, the details of the arrangements as well as the case content, I'm afraid we have to uphold confidentiality because the extended checking system counts on the trust and cooperation of all the parties involved, including the subject, the referees, as well as the supervisors. So the details have to be kept confidential, so it is not right for me to divulge the details. I've been specific. I'm not interested in individuals. I want to know whether the questionnaires include investment activities and irregularities. Secretary, Mr. President, for any PO before assuming office has to declare all investment activities, including whether interests would be included or involved. So declaration is required. And then, in fact, under the PO code, in fact, we have a strict requirement. That is, the POs must have the high standards of integrity. They should set an example. They should abide by the law. We do have very strict requirements. And for this requirement, other than being stated in the introductory part of the PO code, in fact, the code itself is also part of the employment contract. When there is a breach of the code, then the administration will enforce the law and will also regard it as a breach of the contract, and then will also hold the officer liable for this. My question was clear. That is in part 1 of your reply. You talked about the questionnaires. Want to know whether the candidates for nomination to become POs have to declare if they have been involved in any irregularities. Secretary, well, for the extended checking, the questionnaires require the subject to make declarations about detailed personal particulars, and this means that it can include quite a lot of information. And the police also have an interview with the subject, and if necessary, all sorts of information will be sort of touched upon for the purpose of checking. As to the question asked by Mr. Sin, it goes into the details. It's not right for me to give an answer. Mr. Kwok, Mr. Chen, I want to know whether the police can, or whether the administration can prevent any conflict of interest or transfer of interest upon departure from the administration by the POs. Secretary, well, for POs, of course, prior to appointment, the subject has to undergo extended checking, and then while in office, declaration would be needed. Upon departure from the office, we have also set up in the code that they have to prevent conflict of interest and also transfer of interest. Say, for example, for POs within the first year of departure, if he is to become a director or partner in any commercial entity, or if he is to provide professional services solely or together with others, they must consult the advice of a advisory committee regarding such matters. The views of the advisory committee has to be sought. The discussion is confidential, but then the finding is published, and I'm sure members have already had some understanding about the advice given. And then a year later, the PO cannot be involved in claims, action, legal action, or discussion or negotiation related to official duty on behalf of others, and they can't be involved in any lobbying work for others. And in fact, what I have just said, it has already been included in the employment contract. So if a PO doesn't follow this, it can be regarded as a breach of the contract, and we may also enforce the contract terms and take action. As I have said, for POs, upon departure from office, if there is conflict of interest or transfer of interest, then we can invoke the relevant ordinance, say, for example, Prevention of Bribery Ordinance, or the common law offense of misconduct in public office, to investigate into them and penalize them. Thank you. Mr. Leung Yu-chung. Mr. President, in his reply, the Secretary said that POs, and in this case, the Secretary for Development, who is a PO, has to follow the requirements of the code to prevent conflict of interest. I think it is not quite meaningful. We all know that POs have to follow the code. It's a matter of whether he has really abided by the terms of the code. On many occasions, the Secretary for Development gave written statements and met with the media. But does it mean that the administration accepts that the Secretary for Development has not breached the code, and so there hasn't been any in-depth investigation? Secretary, Mr. President, as I have said, for the case of the Secretary for Development, since August, he himself, as well as his wife, on many occasions have already made disclosures regarding the case. In my reply, I have repeated time and again that I'm not going to provide supplementary information or comment on this case today. The Secretary is part of the POs. Of course, he has to abide by the code and has to avoid conflict of interests. I have noted that in one of his statements, and in fact this is also referred to in my main reply, he has already undertaken that during his tenure as Secretary for Development, he and his wife would not be involved in the Hong Kong property market except for personal usage. So he has already made this statement openly. For the others, I think please be understanding, I'm not going to provide supplementary information or comments. Mr. Leung. Mr. President, he hasn't answered my question. I'm not talking about the future. Not getting involved in the property market, that's about the future. But what about the past? Does it mean that he is satisfied with what is said in the written statements and the media meeting, and so there's no further follow-up? Secretary, anything to add? Not really, Mr. President, but I have to emphasize once again that towards the end of my main reply, be it the directors of bureaus, the deputies, or the political assistants, they are politically appointed officials, so they have to make sure that the information that they disclose is accurate, and they have to make sure that the details mentioned in the statements and undertakings and disclosures made in the past and the future, they are being made solemnly. And I'm sure POs are at the top layer, and I'm sure if there is any inaccuracies, I'm sure the PO himself has to bear the responsibility. We've spent 23 minutes on this question.
Question number 3, Mr. Chung Kwok-pan. President, thank you. At the Legislative Council meeting on October the 17th this year, the Chief Executive undertook that the government would assist the industrial, commercial and professional sectors in removing the obstacles in the course of development in Hong Kong and overseas, and will collaborate with the central and local authorities to resolve the difficulties. Although members from the industrial and commercial sectors in the past years repeatedly requested the government to consider and review Section 39E of Inland Revenue Ordinance, the government had all along rejected their requests for reasons based on such principles as territorial source and tax symmetry. On the other hand, some Hong Kong businessmen on the mainland have told me that Hong Kong enterprises in the PRD are suffering from the severe blow of various negative factors, such as contraction of markets in Europe and America, escalating wages, and rising costs of currency exchange, as well as urgency in restructuring. Will government inform this Council A in order to honor the principle of appropriately proactive governance, whether the government will proactively discuss, based on the spirit of taking special measures for special problems, with the mainland authorities, ways to remove obstacles caused by adherence to principles such as territorial source and tax symmetry, so as to review and amend Section 39E and other tax policies, if it will, of the details. If not, why not? B, whether the government has specific measures and plans to bring innovation and scientific researches conducted by Hong Kong enterprises on the mainland into the remit of tax support policy, and to provide depreciation allowances for machinery and plants used on the mainland by Hong Kong enterprises, so as to support the development of Hong Kong individuals and enterprises on the mainland. If it has of the details, if not, why not? And C, given that some SMEs have pointed out that its productive costs on the mainland have been rising continuously, they have to rack their brains to explore opportunities overseas development, lower costs, and enhanced productivity, whether the authorities will consider offering more subsidies to SMEs, for example, assisting them in investing overseas regions such as Burma, to develop industrial parks so as to enable Hong Kong manufacturers to go global and maintain their competitiveness. Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. President, my reply to the various parts of the questions is as follows. A. In formulating and reviewing any tax provisions, the administration has to consider carefully such essential factors as whether the proposed changes would be consistent with the established taxation principles of Hong Kong, whether there would be any possible avoidance loopholes. All along, Hong Kong adopts the territorial source and tax symmetry principles. According to the territorial source principle, only profits arising in or derived from Hong Kong by carrying on a trade, profession, or business in Hong Kong are chargeable to profits tax in Hong Kong. In other words, profits not arising in or derived from Hong Kong are not subject to profits tax. Under the tax symmetry principle, if a Hong Kong enterprise has incurred outgoings or expenses, including specified capital expenditure which has been allowed as deductions in the production of assessable profits in Hong Kong, that Hong Kong enterprise can also claim deductions for such outgoings and expenses according to IRO. However, if that Hong Kong enterprise has not incurred any outgoings or expenses for the production of assessable profits in Hong Kong, there is neither necessity nor reasonable ground for the enterprise to claim the relevant deductions. In assessing the tax liability of each taxpayer according to the IRO, the Inland Revenue Department adopts the above two fundamental taxation principles for the purpose of tax assessments. The above-mentioned simple, fair, and effective taxation principles are unique features of Hong Kong's tax regime, as distinct from many other tax jurisdictions. If we were to substitute the long-held principles of territorial source and tax symmetry, we would have to model on the tax systems of many other tax jurisdictions and to change taxes on Hong Kong taxpayers for their worldwide income. This would cause fundamental changes to our tax regime and undermine the competitiveness of Hong Kong as an international financial and business center. I don't believe this is what we envisage, and this also doesn't serve the overall interest of Hong Kong. As pointed out in my reply to the written question raised by Dr. Lam Tai-fai on October the 31st, the administration had already conducted an in-depth study on Section 39E of the IRO during the last term of LegCo. After examining the relevant taxation principles in relation to processing activities carried out by the Hong Kong enterprises in the mainland, and taking into consideration the views of the industrial and commercial sector, the accounting sector, and tax experts on the matter, we already conducted a review on the relevant matter in 2010. I wish to take this opportunity to reiterate to LegCo the reason underlying our conclusion that the restriction in Section 39E of the IRO should not be relaxed. Under the import processing mode, Hong Kong enterprises engaging in import processing are only involved in trading activities in buying or selling of goods, not manufacturing activities. As such, they will only be liable to profits tax in Hong Kong for taxable profits derived from the trading activities. The relevant machinery or plant is solely used by the mainland enterprises, being separate legal entities in their manufacturing activities. The profits thus generated from the manufacturing activities are wholly derived from the mainland and liable to the mainland tax. Any relaxation of Section 39E of the IRO to the effect that depreciation allowance in Hong Kong would be provided to such machinery and plant would not only violate the territorial source and tax symmetry principles, but may also be perceived as encouraging transfer pricing, which would affect the taxing rights of Hong Kong and other tax jurisdictions, including the mainland. This would not be in line with the international principles and guidelines for handling transfer pricing, and Hong Kong may be regarded as a harmful tax competitor. As a matter of fact, we have examined exchanged views with the State Administration of Taxation on the issue of transfer pricing and secured a confirmation on the implementation arrangements in the mainland concerning transfer pricing. As a result, in view of Hong Kong's established taxation principles, as well as the issues relating to transfer pricing, we have come to the conclusion that it is not justifiable to relax the restrictions in Section 39E. Since the completion of our review in 2010, we note that the industry has raised requests relating to the matter from time to time. We would be pleased to continue our effort in explaining to the industry the administration's stance. B. As regards expenditure on research and development incurred by enterprises, Section 16B of the IRO allows deduction by a person carrying on any trade, profession, or business for expenditure incurred in R&D related to that trade, profession, and business. Where any expenditure which qualifies for deduction under Section 16B is incurred outside Hong Kong, full amount of the expenditure is allowable as a deduction under Section 16B if the relevant trade, professional trade, or business is carried out solely in Hong Kong. However, if the relevant trade, profession, or business is carried out partly in or partly out of Hong Kong, IRD would consider the activities of that trade, profession, or business in totality to arrive at a reasonable deductible proportion of such expenditure which relates to the production of chargeable profits in Hong Kong. C. For the development of SMEs, the Commerce Economic Development Bureau has been implementing various measures to support their development, assist them in moving up the value chain and upgrading and restructuring their operations. The government provides various support measures to SMEs, including financial support, for example, SME Loan Guarantee Scheme, SME Export Marketing Fund, and SME Development Fund, administered by the Trade and Industry Department, as well as the newly implemented $1 billion dedicated fund on branding, upgrading, and domestic sales. The Innovation Technology Fund and R&D cash rebate scheme administered by the Innovation and Technology Commission and the Design Smart initiative of Create Hong Kong. As regards assistance for Hong Kong enterprises in expanding overseas, the government will continue to organize through the TDC various promotional activities such as trade missions and exhibitions to enable enterprises to better understand the investment environment and development potentials of emerging markets. If Hong Kong enterprises are interested in expanding their business overseas, like the setting up of an overseas industrial park, the government would be pleased to convey their concrete proposals to the relevant authorities for consideration. The government will closely monitor changes in the economy and review the various support measures with a view to maintaining the competitiveness in the international market. Mr. Chung Kwok-pan. President, the government keeps talking about appropriately proactive and assist the industries to upgrade themselves. And they do need to make investment like automation and so on. They need to make investment in machinery and plant. If the government is supporting the upgrading and restructuring, why doesn't the government provide taxation support to them? Secretary, President, we have explained this on many occasions. On the question of territorial resource and tax symmetry principles, simply put, if an activity is chargeable to profits tax, then the expenditure can be deductible. And this is a fundamental tax principle that we follow. Now, the controversy over 39E regarding import processing, basically for corporations operating in the mainland, would they enjoy the deduction? We've explained that in that kind of scenario, there will be no deduction allowed because that would fly in the face of the principle. Of course, the sector can make investment, but under the existing taxation principles, we do have to have a clear definition as to what deduction would be allowed. Mr. Lo. President, question B of Mr. Chung Kwok-pan refers to the R&D activities in the mainland and whether they would enjoy any taxation support. Now, I'm not merely referring to the enterprises in the mainland, but I'm talking about the R&D investment and whether they would enjoy any tax deduction in order to encourage more investment and encourage Hong Kong to move up the scale. Many have suggested that R&D should enjoy tax exemption or tax concession to 2 or 3 times their expenditure. This was the undertaking given by Mr. C.Y. Leung during the election. Will the government implement this policy to encourage enterprises in Hong Kong to engage in R&D? And do you have a timetable for that, Secretary? But Dr. Loh's question, under the taxation ordinance, as I said in my principal reply, 16B of the IRO covers a lot of expenditures on R&D. Now, it covers a broad spectrum of things, the R&D, feasibility study, market studies, all the studies or surveys in connection with the development and so on. It covers a broad spectrum of areas. And under the 16B of IRO, expenditure can be deducted. There was a suggestion before that instead of 100% deduction, there should be 200% or 300% deduction and so on. Now, there may be problems. The 16B exemption is quite liberal in itself. Now, whether we have to allow deduction 2 times or 3 times, that would have implications on the taxation revenue. And these would also create undesirable loopholes and some activities that we don't consider appropriate might be taken advantage of as tax deduction purposes. In the light of overseas experience, if you allow deduction up to 2 times, there would be very stringent restrictions. Like, for example, they have to engage the universities for the research before they wouldn't be allowed the deduction up to 2 or 3 times. So I think when we consider whether we should implement this, we will have to take into account the taxation revenue, the tax regime in Hong Kong. And we do have to look into the overseas experience in depth before we can come to any conclusion. Mr. Loh? President, the Secretary hasn't made himself sufficiently clear. I'm specifically referring to 2 times or 3 times tax deduction for R&D. Do you have any timetable? If you don't have any timetable, have you already started the study in this regard? Dr. Loh, I think the Secretary has made it very clear in the context of the existing government policy. If you're not happy with the reply, I suggest that you take it up on separate occasions. Mr. Sin Chung Kai, President, in answer to Dr. Loh Wai Kwok, the Secretary already said that under 16B4 of the Inland Revenue Ordinance, there are recognized R&D institutes. Now, for these institutions, I bet that this will include the S3 and also the universities and so on. If the industries in Hong Kong were to engage the science park or the S3 or the universities for research and development, would there be any tax deduction up to a certain point? And there would be no abuse in this regard. Will a review be undertaken by the Secretary? Secretary? Mr. Sin, you've got a point there. Now, 16B refers to the deductions, and they have to fulfill certain criteria, like the R&D, the it is undertaken by the taxpayer, it is relevant to a particular trade. Now, this covers a broad spectrum of organizations, and the universities, the chambers, and so on. And the Deputy Secretary will have to approve under Section 16B. As to further studies, I'm happy to listen to what the sector has to say. Mr. Charles Mock? Yes, President, I'd like to take up this R&D for high technology. Now, R&D as a percentage of the GDP is one of the lowest in the region. So I think that we do need some measures to plow in some money to encourage these kind of activities. Dr. Low and Mr. Sin raised the questions. I don't think the Secretary has come up with any specific replies as to whether there are any concrete plans. Now, there can be some restriction that can be imposed. We'll have to make sure that there would be some useful tax concessions in this regard. Secretary, will you be adopting an open mind and consulting the trade as to what is feasible and how we can take the first step forward? And step by step, we can start small and we can expand the tax concessions as we go along to encourage the local companies and the commercial sector, not just the academic circle, to engage in the R&D initiatives. Secretary, President, the sector has raised all these views. The government has already started the R&D cash rebate scheme. This has got underway, and there were suggestions that this should be relaxed. We will listen to what the sectors have to say. Now, during in the context of the budget, we would welcome any views that can be channeled to us. Mr. Leung Sing, President, in the last paragraph, the Secretary mentioned that for Hong Kong enterprises to expand overseas, like the investment in the development of an industrial park, the government would be pleased to convey their concrete proposals to the relevant authorities. Do we have any success stories? What sort of responsibility does the government carry in this regard? Secretary? Well, President, I think we're talking about a new initiative here. Previously, Hong Kong enterprises have been moving into the PRD at the commercial level, and at the government level, we have been doing a lot of promotion to make sure to enable the enterprises in Hong Kong to set up their businesses in the mainland. Now, if they were to venture out of the mainland, now that would be a novel proposition. Mr. Chung Kwok-pan raised this particular question. Maybe he would be interested to find out how we can take this forward. And we are prepared to listen to what the industry has to say and see what can be done to assist this development.
The fourth question, Mr. Chan Han-pan. Thank you, Mr. President. Given that the general outpatient clinics under the hospital authority provide evening outpatient services until 10 p.m. only, members of the public seeking medical consultation in late nights may seek consultation only at private clinics offering overnight outpatient services or the accident and emergency departments of public hospitals. However, since only 16 public hospitals have A&E departments, members of public seeking medical consultation have to wait for hours to receive treatment. In this connection, would the government inform this Council, A, whether it will request the HA to enhance the existing evening outpatient services, including extending the hours to 12 midnight and increasing the number of consultation quotas? If it will, of the details, if not reasons for that. B, whether it will request the HA to implement overnight outpatient services in individual districts on a trial basis with a view to alleviating the pressure on A&E departments. If it will, the details of the plan, if not the reasons for that. And C, given that some members of the public have relayed to me that as the demand for evening outpatient services is greater in some densely populated districts or in districts with relatively more elderly residents, such as Tin Shui Wai, and there is no A&E department of public hospitals, a great inconvenience has been caused to members of the public. Whether the authorities will require the HA to extend the service hours of the evening outpatient services provided in such districts or set up overnight outpatient services so as to enable patients to receive timely treatment. Secretary for Food and Health. Mr. President, I will answer Mr. Chan Han-pan's question comprehensively. Private primary care service in Hong Kong are mainly provided by the private sector. Public primary care services, including general outpatient services provided by the HA, are primarily targeted low-income groups such as the elderly, at low-income groups, the elderly and the chronically ill. At present, the HA operates 74 general outpatient clinics, of which 23 provide evening outpatient services. Patients under the care of GOPCs comprise two major categories. Chronic disease patients with stable medical conditions, such as patients with diabetes or hypertension, and episodic disease patients with relatively mild symptoms, such as those suffering from influenza, cold, gastroenteritis. For those with episodic disease, consultation time slots at GOPCs in the next 24 hours are available for booking through HA's telephone appointment system. As for chronic disease patients requiring follow-up consultations, they will be assigned a visiting time slot and do not need to make separate appointments. In 2011-12, the 74 GOPCs have recorded around 5 million attendances involving more than 1.3 million patients. Over 90% of the target users of GOP service, including the elderly and recipients of comprehensive social security and medical fee waiver, were able to secure a consultation time slot successfully through the telephone appointment system within 2 working days. To improve public primary care service, enhance support for chronic disease patients, and raise the public's awareness of health issues, the government has in recent years rolled out a series of primary care services through HA to strengthen the management of chronic diseases. These include the provision of health risk assessment and follow-up care for patients with diabetes mellitus or hypertension by multidisciplinary teams of GOPCs, and targeted treatment services for high-risk chronic patients by nurses and allied health professionals such as physiotherapists, occupational therapists, and pharmacists. Through these measures, it is hoped that the risk of complications and the need of consultations can be reduced for chronic patients, thereby reducing consultation time slots for patients with episodic diseases. At the same time, the HA has been taking steps to renovate the premises and upgrading facilities of GOPCs to streamline patient flow and improve the clinic's environment. It is also trying to recruit additional staff as far as possible to increase the service capacity of GOPCs. Regarding Tin Shui Wai, the government and the HA have over the years introduced various measures to enhance public health care services in the area. In February this year, the first Community Health Center in the territory, which is located at Tin Yip Road in Tin Shui Wai and designed according to our primary care development strategy and service delivery model, came into operation to provide one-stop primary care services, including general outpatient as well as nurse and allied health service for the public. The HA envisages that the new CHC, together with the existing Tin Shui Wai Health Center at Tin Shui Road, will be able to provide over 200,000 attendances of GOP services for the district on a yearly basis. The HA has also launched the Tin Shui Wai Primary Care Partnership Project since 2008, under which Patients suffering from specific chronic diseases with stable medical conditions in need of follow-up treatment at Tin Shui Wai GOPCs can opt to receive outpatient services from private medical practitioners in the district with subsidies from the government. The project has now been extended to the entire Tin Shui Wai area, benefiting some 1,600 patients. At present, 24-hour accident and emergency services are provided at Pok Oi Hospital in Yuen Long. The planned Tin Shui Wai Hospital, which is scheduled to come into operation in 2016, will also provide A&E and other services, including special outpatient services and ambulatory service to address the healthcare needs of the district. As GOPCs are not intended for provision of emergency services, patients with severe and acute symptoms should go to the A&E departments of hospitals where the necessary staffing, equipment, and ancillary facilities are in place for appropriate treatment and comprehensive care. To ensure efficient use of GOPC resources, extending general outpatient services into the small hours or providing overnight services is not cost-effective and would create greater pressure on healthcare staffing. At this point, the administration has no plan to operate GOP services at late night or around the clock. The HA will continue to implement measures to enhance general outpatient services, including strengthening its staffing, renovating and expanding existing GOPCs, upgrading clinical facilities, etc. It will also closely monitor the operation and service utilization and deploy manpower and other resources flexibly to enhance efficiency and quality of GOP service to meet patients' needs for public primary care service. Mr. Chan Han-pan, my question has not been answered. My question is to bring relief to the waiting at A&E departments. If you wait at A&E department, you have to wait for 4 or 5 hours. Does he think that is reasonable? The Secretary. Mr. President, at the A&E department, we have a plan according to our priority. We will give attention to serious and critically ill patients. And therefore, those who are not critically ill, who are not severely ill, will have to wait for a longer time. And we, depending on resources availability, we may provide information on the waiting time of nearby A&E departments so that members of the public can make a choice. But the A&E departments are facing heavy staffing constraints, and we would like to recruit more staff members in this so as to shorten the waiting time. Ms. Priscilla Leung. Mr. President, I don't know whether the Secretary has heard that elderly people in making appointments through the telephone appointment system, the elderly will have to dial the telephone for several days. The evening service is very important. To meet such a demand deficiency, would the administration consider sending mobile clinics to remote areas so as to meet the needs of the elderly? The Secretary. I think Ms. Priscilla Leung's question is in relation to evening service. Our GOP service is not for emergency cases. And for really emergency cases, the patient should go to the A&E departments. And for the two categories of patients who are severe and acute, their waiting time is shorter. Now, please repeat which part of the question is not answered. Would the administration consider using mobile clinics to relieve the pressure on the A&E calls? I think we will face the same problem if we adopt such an approach. We are facing staff shortage. in view of staff shortage, the present modus operandi is more cost-effective. If we are to deploy more people, deploy manpower to mobile clinics, that would only increase the acute situation of shortage of manpower. Mr. Tam Yu Chung, with regard to evening service of the GOPCs, we are asking for extending the service hours in order to relieve the pressure during the daytime. Now, since you have staff shortage and you say that you will try to increase manpower to shorten waiting time, but we have not seen any results. But by extending service hours, will that help to relieve the waiting time or shorten the waiting time? If citizens who fall ill and who are not in an acute situation and they want to seek consultation, then the reasonable answer is to have evening GOP service. Of the 74 GOPCs, only 23 provide evening service. Will the administration consider extending GOPC evening service to more than 1/3 of the clinics? The Secretary. I know that there is still demand which we cannot meet. But as I've said earlier, with limited resources, in particular in view of shortage of manpower, we need to focus our resources on the time slots where there are many patients. Now, at present, evening service operates until 10 p.m. And generally, after dinner, there are more patients. And if people want to have consultation after 10 p.m., there are, and if they are not, and if they are on an emergency case, then they will have. If they are in an emergency, then they have to go to the A&E departments, and then they will be subject to a triage arrangement. And if they belong to the two serious and acute categories, then they will be given priority. And if they are not severe or acute, then they will have to wait longer. If we are to spread out our resources, that will only make the situation worse. Dr. Leung Ka-lau. Thank you, Mr. President. The cost of treating a case at an A&E department is $850, and 70% of the attendances at A&E department are not acute. The A&E department in the past did make the arrangement for private consultation next to A&E department and charging $200 each. The A&E department was free of charge in the past. Because of the big difference, it was not effective. Now, A&E departments are charging $100 per consultation, and there is a shortage of manpower. And there are large quantities of non-acute cases. Will the administration consider setting private consultation next door, charging about $200 or so, and the administration can subsidize the poor up to, say, $100, and that will bring relief to the pressure on A&E departments, and that will also save the cost, because each case of A&E department charges costs $850. The Secretary, as said by Mr. Leung, Dr. Leung, a few years ago, when A&E department didn't impose any charge, the administration did have private consultation next to A&E department on general practice, and it was a failure because A&E department didn't charge anything at that time. But I have an open mind. Still, we have to find the space available. The HA is of the view that since the patients are at the A&E department, according to the triage arrangement, some of the A&E departments may consider deploying their manpower to, say, within a certain period of time when there are many non-acute cases. The patients of these category can be dealt with at another part of A&E department without affecting the overall capability of the A&E department in dealing with acute cases. I will adopt such an approach first. As for Mr. Leung's proposal, I will consider that further at the next stage to see if it's necessary. Well, Dr. Leung, I have not heard about it. So would the Secretary provide a written, the details in writing? Yes, I've just talked to the HA on this possibility, and the HA is still considering the details and also the workflow. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Mr. President. The Secretary has answered part of the question I intended to answer. As for A&E departments, they are dealing quite a lot of non-acute cases, and the Secretary says that he will consider redeploying resources flexibly to meet the demand. I welcome that. I hope the Secretary will also consider this. In Tin Shui Wai, there is the Primary Care Partnership Project. Which help to reduce the waiting time at A&E department of the hospitals. I just want to know whether there's any timetable for that. I don't understand the question. Can he further explain his question? What do you mean by timetable? The Secretary says he has already answered the question I intended to answer. You don't need to repeat that part. I want to know when that plan will be implemented, and that is through a flexible redeployment of manpower to deal with non-acute cases at the A&E department. The Secretary. As I've said earlier, I've just talked to the HA recently on this issue. Once they have thought through the arrangements, then I will provide information to the members concerned. Mr. Leung Chi-chung. Mr. President, now in his answer, the Secretary says that acute patient, or rather A&E departments' quotas have been occupied by non-acute patients, thereby increasing the pressure on the A&E departments. In remote places like Tin Shui Wai, there aren't adequate medical staff. Would the administration consider increasing medical staff in those areas to deal with the long waiting hours at A&E departments? The Secretary. With regard to the manpower shortage, there are several specialties facing this, and A&E specialty is one of these. The HA at present is trying various means to improve the working conditions of doctors so as to retain more doctors and reduce the wastage rate. The HA in recent years is actively recruiting part-time practitioners, whether they are in the private sector or and also by giving additional allowances, getting doctors to work extra hours. One cannot rule out the possibility that HA may consider recruiting overseas doctors through limited registration. In the long term, the medical schools have increased their places. After a few years, the shortage of doctors may be relieved further. Mr. Yu Siwing. Mr. President, with regard to the Tin Shui Wai Hospital, which is scheduled to come into operation in 2016, and it will also provide A&E service. In the 4 years interim, will the administration consider cooperating with private clinics then to deal with the shortage of A&E service, and the charge will only be at the government level? Well, in fact, the HA does provide subsidy to some of the patients to consult private practitioners, and we have 2 projects to enhance primary health care. In Tin Shui Wai, I do not repeat that. As for the health care coupon for the elderly, some people ask why can't the coupon be used on consulting GOPCs. The reason is that we want the elderly to spend the coupons on primary care and on preventive care in the private sector. At present, the coupon is just $500, but next year we will enhance that to $1,000, and we hope that the implementation of the plan will enable elderly people to visit private practitioners, thereby bringing relief to the public healthcare sector. We've spent more than 23 minutes.
Fifth question, Dr. Helena Wong. President, long queues are often seen in female toilets in public places. In a paper submitted to the Legislative Council in February 2012, the authorities proposed to amend the relevant building regulations. The proposed amendments include enhancing the standard of provision of sanitary fitments, taking into account the assessed numbers of male and female users in different types of venues, and adopting a ratio of 1 to 1.5, replacing the current ratio of 1 to 1 for assessing the numbers of male and female in the premises, or female toilets in the premises. On the other hand, it has been learned that legislation was proposed in the United States Congress in 2010, demanding that the male to female toilet compartment ratio be increased to 1 to 2, and Taiwan introduced in 2010 legislation requiring the male to female toilet compartment ratio in cinemas and bus stations not lower than 1 to 5. In addition, some members of the public have pointed out to me that toilets in public places also lack facilities which allow family members of different genders to take care of their infants, elderly, and children in using toilets. Regarding toilets in public places, will the government inform this council? A. Of the latest work progress of the aforesaid legislative amendments and the expected time for submission of the amendment regulations to LegCo. B. Given that, as mentioned above, the current MF toilet compartment, including urinals ratio in Hong Kong, is lower than the ratios in other regions, coupled with the fact that women outnumber men in Hong Kong's population, and that females usually use toilets for a longer time than males do, whether the authorities will consider further increasing the MF toilet compartment ratio to not lower than 1 to 2, and C. Whether the authorities will consider introducing legislation to improve the facilities in male and female toilets in public places, for example, installing handrails, coat hooks, skid-proof flooring, as well as facilities which will allow family members of different genders to take care of infants, the elderly, and children in using toilets, so as to implement family-friendly policies, whether they will consider making reference to overseas examples and studying the provision of standalone unisex sanitary facilities so as to facilitate those users who need to take care of family members of the opposite sex, if they will, of the details, if not the reasons for that. Thank you. Secretary for Development. Thank you, President. The buildings standards of sanitary fitments, plumbing, drainage works, and latrines regulations, or CAP 123I, or the regulations, set out the minimum standards for the provision of sanitary fitments, plumbing, and drainage works in private buildings. Under the regulations, the provision of male and female sanitary fitments in private buildings is based on the assessed number of male and female users of the premises. For places of public entertainment and cinemas, the present regulations prescribe, for the purpose of determining the provision of male and female sanitary fitments, a ratio of 1:1 for assessing the number of male to female in the premises. The Buildings Department has commissioned a consultant to carry out a comprehensive review of the regulations and conducted field surveys on the use of sanitary facilities in various public places in Hong Kong in view of public concerns on the inadequate provision of female sanitary fitments in public places. The BD has, after taking into account the consultant's recommendations, promulgated the practice note for authorized persons and registered structural engineers in May 2005. The practice note recommended to the building industry that for the purpose of assessing the number of male to female in shopping arcades, department stores, cinemas, and places of public entertainment in new private developments, the male to female ratio should be raised from the statutory 1:1 to 1:1.25, thereby increasing the provision of water closet fitments for female. Between 2005 and 2008, BD conducted extensive consultation with the building industry and various stakeholders on the consultant's recommendations, taking into account the views received and in response to some stakeholders' aspirations for increasing the provision of female sanitary facilities. BD further improved the proposal by further increasing the ratio to 1:1.5 for assessing the proportion of male to female users in shopping arcades, department stores, cinemas, and public places of entertainment, thus increasing the provision of female toilets and providing greater convenience for female users in these public places. In February this year, we submitted a paper to the LegCo panel on development outlining our proposal for an overhaul of the regulations. The proposal covered a wide range of aspects, including not only a proposal for enhancing the standards for the provision of female sanitary fitments in public places, but also the repeal of obsolete provisions as well as the replacement of the existing prescriptive standards by performance-based requirements for the sake of keeping up with new and changing building technology. The oral question raised by Dr. Helena Wong today gives me an opportunity to report on the latest progress of our work. My reply to the three-part question is as follows. A. At the meeting of the LegCo panel on development held on the 28th of February this year, members in general supported the administration's proposal for increasing the provision of female sanitary fitments in public places. However, some members expressed concern, particularly on whether the administration's proposed increase in the ratio from the statutory 1:1 to 1:1.5 for assessing the number of male to female users in shopping arcades, department stores, cinemas, and places of public entertainment would result in gender discrimination against men. In accordance with the panel's suggestion, we have already sought legal advice on the issue. I am pleased to report that after careful examination of our proposed legislative amendments and the relevant justifications, the Department of Justice has advised that the proposed enhancement in the level of provision of female sanitary fitments in public places should not lead to less favorable treatment of men, and hence should not give rise to allegations of gender discrimination. Since the legal issue has now been clarified, we are making preparations for amending the regulations. Given the extensive scope and the complexity of the proposed amendments, it is expected that we need to take some time for drafting the amendment regulations. We will expedite the work and should aim at submitting the amendment regulations to the Legislative Council for vetting within the current legislative year. Pending the introduction of the amendment regulations, BD is updating the practical notes or practice notes for authorized persons, registered structural engineers, and registered geotechnical engineers, or hereinafter called the practical note, along the lines of the legislative amendments in order to promote the early implementation of the enhanced standards for the provision of female sanitary fitments in public places. Apart from the enhancement of the standards of provision of female toilets, the practical note would also provide guidelines on the minimum space requirements for various sanitary facilities in public places. It would also advise the building industry to provide sanitary fitments suitable for use by children, as well as unisex toilets in the design of such premises. Since consultation with the building industry is nearing completion, BD aims to issue the revised practical note within this month for earlier adoption of the recommendations by the building industry before implementation of the amendment regulations. Part B, under the regulations, the provision of male and female sanitary fitments in private buildings is based on the assessed number of male and female users of the premises. In drawing up the proposed increase in the male to female ratio from the statutory 1:1 to 1.1 to 1.5, we have completed a comprehensive review on the findings of empirical surveys of the provision of sanitary fitments in various premises, the level of usage, queuing time, usage time, and the level of user satisfaction. In parallel, we have also studied the projected gender ratio of the population published by the Census and Statistics Department and the standards adopted in overseas countries. We have also consulted various stakeholders, including the building industry and women organizations. Under the new proposal, the provision of female toilets in shopping arcades, department stores, cinemas, and places of public entertainment will, on average, increase by about 60%, 160%, and 185% respectively. According to the consultancy study commissioned by BD, the increase would reduce the waiting time to an average of about 1.5 minutes for female toilet users. Part C of the question. As mentioned above, the regulations set out the minimum standards for provision of sanitary fitments, plumbing, and drainage works in private buildings. As regards the other facilities mentioned in the question, such as handrails, coat hooks, skid-proof flooring, as well as facilities which will allow family members of different genders to take care of infants, elderly, and children in using toilets. Since these facilities are not directly related to hygiene aspects of buildings, under the present circumstances, we consider it more appropriate for the building industry to provide such facilities having regard to the design and requirements of individual premises. However, if in the future the community considers it necessary to enact legislation to set out the minimum standards or provide specific guidelines for the building industry, we will keep an open mind and will explore the issues further. On the suggestion of introducing unisex toilets, BD's consultancy report specifically pointed out that prior to introducing legislation on the provision of such facilities, more in-depth study and research would be required, including consideration of the impact on the sanitary conditions and maintenance of toilets, property management, and cultural differences, etc. Hence, the suggestion will not be incorporated in the proposed amendments to the regulations at the present stage. Nevertheless, as indicated in the first part of my reply, BD would revise the practical or practice note and encourage the building industry to provide unisex sanitary facilities in the designs in order to provide greater convenience for parents to take care of their children of different genders or adult users to take care of family members of different genders in using sanitary facilities. Dr. Helena Wong. President, I'm pleased to hear from the Secretary that within this legislative year, the amendment regulations will be tabled before this Council. But then, with regard to your reply just now, in particular the last few points, I'd like to ask some supplementary questions. According to your projection, there have been an increase by 160 and 185% respectively to the provision of these toilets, and in the end, the average waiting time will be reduced to about 1.5 minutes. That's the average waiting time. But then, with regard to this target, number one, I query if this is accurate, and number two, if this is too low a standard, would that be able to meet the standard? Because there are many women going to these shopping arcades and also department stores, and you're increasing the number very marginally. And on average, the waiting time at present is some 10 minutes. So it's been a long and hard wait before you introduce the amendment regulations. I don't want to see a situation whereby shortly after the amendment, in 2005, you change it to 1 to 1.25, and then in 2008, you increase it to 1 to 1.5. So I don't want to see a situation whereby as soon as you introduce the amendment regulation, it will already be lagging behind. So why is it that for female users, they will have to wait for 1.5 minutes while men do not have to wait? Will that be discriminatory against women? You can only ask one supplementary, Dr. Helena Wong. Secretary. Thank you, President. Number one, I'd like to clarify this. It's not that we are reducing the waiting time by 1.5 minutes. Actually, we are actually talking about the average waiting time of 1.5 minutes. In fact, even for men going to toilet, sometimes we would also have to queue up. We also have to wait. It depends on the venues. And that's why, after taking reference from the recommendations of the consultants and also the views that we received during the consultation, we believe that we should take this step first, so that on the basis of the existing standards, we will make some enhancements first, and then we'll see what needs to be done as further improvements, and we have an open mind with regard to what needs to be done. Dr. Wong, your question has not been answered. Well, President, I'm suggesting that you will not be able to meet the target. And in fact, even for women, they are not prepared to accept the standard. Well, your view is very clear. You do not have to repeat that. And if you think that your question has not been answered, please point out which part has not been answered. So I'm asking why women have to wait for 1.5 minutes. Secretary. President, on this particular point, I don't have anything to add, but then I can give you some examples. For example, well, under the new standard, after it's been introduced or implemented, for example, for a 3,500 square meter shopping center, the current requirement is that they will have to have 6 water closets. But then, with regard to the ratio between male to female, is 1 to 0.8. And then under the new standard, then with the same size of a shopping center, then in terms of the number of female closets or water closet, that will be increased to 11. And then for male to female ratio, if you just look at water closet, then that would be 1 to 3.1. And then also for sanitary facilities, instead of a ratio of 1 to 1.8, it would also be increased substantially. Mr. James Tian, President, I support the proposal to increase the number of female toilets because I've been to many places, for example, the cultural center in Tsim Sha Tsui. Well, very often for women will have to queue up for a long time. And also, well, what I'd like to know is that for new buildings, that can be done. But my question for the administration is, what about existing facilities? For example, the cultural center in Tsim Sha Tsui. With the new standards being introduced, does that mean that they will have to be renovated so that they will have to meet the latest standards? Or you will have to work on the government facilities like the cultural center? So will you be requiring them to upgrade their facilities so that they will meet the standard of 1 to 1.5? Secretary, thank you, President. Generally speaking, new legislation, when it comes to old buildings designed under the old standards, they will not have retrospective effects. They will not be requiring them to catch up with the new standards. With regard to the question raised by Mr. Tian, well, I'll bring that back for consideration, but then at the same time, we will also have to bear this in mind. That is, for existing buildings, there might be some physical constraints, and as a result, they may not be able to adopt the new standards because, after all, they were designed in accordance with the old standards. Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. Thank you, President. My question is very similar to the one asked by Mr. James Tian for some cultural facilities in terms of the ratio between male to female toilets is not able to catch up with the demand because where there are shows and there might be some intermission, and because of the limited time during the intermission, and if females are not able to attend to their nature's call, then they would not be able to go back in time for the resumption of the show. And therefore, I'd like to know if there can be short-term measures to improve the situation. Secretary. Thank you, President. Well, both Mr. Ma Fong-kwok and Mr. James Tian referred to a situation which I am also aware of. As to what improvements can be made, well, I'll go back and take it up with the relevant departments. But then, overall speaking, if you look at the legislation, there is no retrospective effect on old venues. Ms. Dari Lee. Well, President, as a woman, with regard to the progress that has been made by the administration in this respect, I'd like to express my very strong dissatisfaction because in shopping centers, very often women will have to queue up for a long time, and very often husbands will have to wait for their wives for a long time. And the most serious situation is with regard to country parks, and often the time we will have to queue up as soon as we arrive, and then by the time when we leave, we still have not been able to get a chance to go to the toilet. So that happens very often. So my question for the administration is that this has been a long-standing phenomenon, and you will have to deal with it very promptly. So my question for the administration is you should be taking the lead so that for all government-funded projects, including the community halls and also performance venues, and also for toilets that will have to be renovated, you will have to adopt the new standards in the design of such facilities to ensure that such facilities can be up to standard as soon as possible. Secretary. President, for new facilities, of course, they'll be built on the latest standards. But then for old facilities, well, members' concerns and suggestions are noted. Well, as far as possible, number one, I'll bring it back to the departments to consider in detail. And then later on at the development panel and also on the issues raised by members, we'll be reporting the progress of our study amongst the departments in due course. Mr. Wong Kwok-hing, President. Well, for shopping arcades or cultural premises, for when it comes to toilets, whether male or female, is not able to meet the demand. The Secretary said that he's aware of that. But then what about mode of public transport? In particular, for the MTRCL, apparently the facilities are not able to meet the requirements, and they might be waiting in long queues, and if they are not able to go to the toilet in a timely manner, then it will be really very difficult on them. So have you considered introducing the standards to the railway facilities so that the MTRCL will be providing such facilities for the passengers or for the public? Secretary, thank you, Mr. Wong, for his suggestion. I'll take it up with the Transport Bureau. Yes. Mr. Alan Leung, thank you, President. Concerning the amendment regulations or CAP 123I, that has not been changed for a long time. Well, what you said that the ratio of 1 to 1.25, it only appears in the practice note that was introduced in 2005. It was merely a suggestion, not a statutory requirement. And my question is that in your main reply, well, you said that well, the proposed amendment will be very extensive and it's also very complex. So my question is, why is it that it's so extensive? Why is it that it's so complicated? Why has it taken the administration such a long time to consider amending 123I to increase the ratio to 1 to 1.5? Secretary. President. Well, we're going to amend the regulations, and there are 91 rules or regulations, and only part of it is related to toilets. And the relevant regulation was introduced in 1959, some 50 years ago, and therefore many provisions have to be updated. And in the course of moving the amendments, we will also take into account how the regulations might be interacting with one another, and they are interrelated, and therefore our approach is to comprehensively review the regulations, and there will be a comprehensive amendment regulation, so it's a comprehensive updating exercise. And number two, we will also be allowing members to look at the regulations as a whole and put them in the right context. And as I said, we will be submitting the legislation within this legislative year. All right, we have already spent more than 23 minutes on the question.
Last question, asking for an oral reply. Mr. Raymond Wong Yuk-man. President, some members of the public have reflected to me that a member of the Executive Council, namely Mr. Chung Kwok-pan, frequently publishes articles in newspaper columns criticizing the Democratic camp and the opposition camp, and he has even made remarks targeting at members of scholarism at a public forum earlier on. Moreover, while the chief executive was the convener of EXCO in the government of the last term, he made remarks from time to time which were in contradiction to the stance of the government. In this regard, will the government inform this council, A, whether the EXCO members aforesaid articles, that is Mr. Chung Kwok-pan and his remarks, reflect the government's stance and attitude towards individual community groups? If not, why the CE and the CS4A have not made clarification promptly to address public concern? B. Apart from the rule of confidentiality, whether EXCO has formulated any guidelines or rules to regulate the public remarks made by EXCO members, and whether the CE or the convener of EXCO will openly admonish EXCO members who have breached such guidelines or rules. If such guidelines or rules have not been formulated, of the reasons for that. And C, given that the media have pointed out that the status of EXCO has been undermined and weakened, whether the government will consider abolishing or restructuring EXCO with a view to economizing on administrative resources and enhancing efficiency in policy implementation. I'd like to remind members that according to RLP 25, no names should be included in a question. When a member reads out his question, he or she should follow the written content submitted beforehand and should not add in content not permitted by the RLP. Chief Secretary for Administration. Mr. President, first of all, I'd like to point out that matters relating to the Executive Council are under the responsibilities of the Chief Executive's Office and the EXCO Secretariat under it. I'm also an EXCO member myself. I would like to respond to Honorable Wong Yuk-man's question on behalf of the CE's office as follows. A. Under Articles 54 and 56 of the Basic Law, EXCO is an organ for assisting the CE in policy making. Except for the appointment, removal, and disciplining of officials and the adoption of measures in emergencies, the CE shall consult EXCO before making important policy decisions, introducing bills to the Legislative Council, or making subsidiary legislation. As the CE's think tank and advisors, EXCO members shall adhere to the principles of confidentiality and collective responsibility. For issues submitted to EXCO for discussion and decision, EXCO members have the obligation to maintain the confidentiality of EXCO agenda and deliberation and to be collectively responsible for and uphold its decisions. As competent and experienced individuals committed to serving Hong Kong, EXCO members hold various other positions and shoulder many responsibilities in the community. Provided that the EXCO principles of confidentiality and collective responsibility are observed, EXCO members have the right to express their personal opinions like other members of the public. B. As explained above, so long as the EXCO principles of confidentiality and collective responsibility are observed, EXCO members have the right to express their personal opinions like other members of the public. If any individual member contravenes the principles of EXCO decisions, the CE will decide how the case should be handled. The CE may, depending on the circumstances, take appropriate actions, including issuing an advice, a warning, a public reprimand, removing the member from office, or taking legal actions. C. EXCO is the highest level organ for assisting the CE in policymaking as specified in the Basic Law. Its role, composition, powers, and responsibilities are clearly stipulated in the Basic Law. It has a constitutional status and has been performing its functions since the reunification. Article 55 of the Basic Law stipulates that CE shall appoint EXCO members from among principal officials, legislative councillors, and public figures. The government will not change the role, composition, powers, and responsibilities of EXCO. Thank you, President. Mr. Wong Yuk-man. The CS4A has not answered my question. This chap always writes in newspapers to criticize the opposition and democratic camps. That's all right if he bases his views on objective facts, but he is manufacturing rumors. He cannot continue to write such articles after he has become an EXCO member. What is most outrageous is that at City Forum, he queried the source of funding of scholarism, and he says that there is a political conspiracy behind it. He is not a columnist. He's an EXCO member. He's part of government. So I'm most unhappy with your answer. Can you tell me, you have been an EXCO member for such a long time, which other EXCO member can write articles in newspapers to criticize and lash out at people like Mr. Chung Kwok-pan? Give me the answer. Just find another EXCO member who has acted like this chap. Mr. Wong Yuk-man, you have asked your question. Please sit down. CS4A. Thank you, President. In the main reply, I have already said that EXCO members, if they do not flout the principles of confidentiality and collective responsibility, we respect them. You have to be responsible. Mr. Chung Kwok-pan, what he said, should that be a subject of collective responsibility of EXCO members? Mr. Wong Yuk-man, please sit down. I have said many times that the question time is not a time for debate. Members can ask questions and then the officials can answer. I'm asking her whether the views expressed by EXCO members should also be for collective responsibility to be borne by all EXCO members. Mr. Wong Yuk-man, please sit down. I have heard your question clearly. You have asked the CS4A to say whether there is any other EXCO member who is like the one that you have pointed out and who has expressed similar views. CS4A, please answer the question. When the CS4A does answer the question, members should not stand up and speak. CS4A. Thank you, President. The logic is such that, as I said in the main reply, without flouting principles of confidentiality and collective responsibility, we respect EXCO members and their right to express their personal opinions in their other capacities. This applies to every member of EXCO. Thank you, President. She has not answered my question. You have asked very clearly on my behalf, but she has not answered it. Her experience, I'm asking her about her experience. Is there any other EXCO member who is like the one I mentioned? He is still writing articles today. CS4A, would you like to answer the question? Any other member of EXCO that you know of are in this category? Thank you, President. As I said in the main reply, EXCO members hold various capacities and they have the right to express their views as long as the views or comments do not go against the principles of confidentiality and collective responsibility. We think we should respect those views. So I do not have any comprehensive analysis as to whether EXCO members have expressed views and comments like the particular member mentioned by Mr. Raymond Wong. Mr. K.K. Fung. Sorry, speaker not coming through. EXCO members should be subject to the principles of confidentiality and also collective responsibility. I like to quote from the manifesto of CY on EXCO. He said that he would enhance the functions of EXCO to have more participation by unofficials, to allow them to expound their talents so that there would be more comprehensive discussion on policies, and also at an early stage of policy formulation, such views should be taken on board. There would be more meetings and more frequency of meetings so that the executive vetting powers can be appropriately delegated. On this, I'd like to ask this question. Recently, some EXCO members jumped the gun to sell 2 units so that he would not have to pay the SSD from the time of election after he has been re-elected. The CE has said that housing is the most important, the extremely important topic to deal with. He said that the EXCO member was not at the meeting, he had not been consulted, but then in the incubation of such a policy, as the CE said in his manifesto, it is very difficult for you to convince people. Please come to your question. It's very difficult. Mr. K.K. Fung, please come to your question. It's very important, almost impossible for you to convince people that such an important issue as housing has never been dealt with in the past few months. So I'd like to ask the CS4A whether this particular EXCO member should also be subject to collective responsibility so that he should not jump the gun and sell his units. Sorry, Mr. K.K. Fung, I cannot allow you to answer this supplementary because you are asking about the behavior of a particular EXCO member. First of all, what you have asked is not related to the main question. Secondly, our rules of procedure do not permit any question on the behavior of EXCO members during question time. So I think your question is not in accordance with the rules of procedure. I do not agree. I did not mention any EXCO members and his name. Just now I have already said why your question should be ruled out of order. I gave you 2 reasons. Mr. Ip Kwok Him, thank you, Mr. President. I'm of the view that every Hong Kong citizen should have the right to express their views. Everyone should have the opportunity to do so, whether you are an EXCO member or a legislative councillor. So just now there was this question whether EXCO members should be limited in their freedom of speech, even if they have complied with the principles of confidentiality. I cannot subscribe to that view. My question for the CS4A is, as EXCO members, in terms of policy formulation, these people would have certain influence on the CE and the administration. Would you consider this? Because members of the public would like to know what EXCO members think about policies without flouting the principle of confidentiality. Can the administration organize TV interviews or allow them to speak on the RTHK program, Letters to Hong Kong, so that members of the public and EXCO members can have more communication? CS4A? Thank you, President. Thank you for that question. As the think tank and advisors of the CE, especially in this term of government, as Mr. K.K. Fung quoted, the CE said in his election manifesto, said that he would very much hope that EXCO members could be more active in the making of policies. And therefore, he would also like members of the public to also understand more the views of individual EXCO members while keeping to the principle of confidentiality. We like that to be seen and done as well. And the fact is that in the past few months, some EXCO members might have also been very much in the limelight. They may have appeared in public as much as I do, and they have also given their views. Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan, President, I think the CS4A is not helping with the situation by giving her supplementary replies. The EXCO members really have a good time, right? They enjoy a joyful ride. They can make policy, they can formulate policy and execute policies, and then they can also indiscriminately criticize people. Now, when will I know what they are doing at any one time? Because they may be criticizing people, and at the same time they may be promoting government's policy. Does it mean the government's policy is to criticize scholarism and to smear scholarism? How can I make the distinction? And then the entire EXCO works behind closed doors. You have the confidentiality and collective responsibility principles. So how can I distinguish the comments of EXCO members, whether it has been discussed at EXCO? For example, Cheung Chi Kong has smeared scholarism. How would I know whether this has been discussed at EXCO. Would it be something also under the principle of collective responsibility that actually he is promoting government policy that is to smear scholarism? What is your question? My question is whether it is a government policy to smear scholarism, and how can I make the distinction between comments by an EXCO member and promotion of government policy? You have asked your question. Please sit down. CS4A. Thank you, President. Hong Kong is a fair, open society that aspires to freedom. And when what Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan says comes to pass, I'm sure the public will be able to distinguish right from wrong. And also in Hong Kong, we have the public monitoring the administration, and the media also monitors the government. The public can always speak up if indeed certain comments would cause public concern. Then of course the administration will make an appropriate reply. Which part of your supplementary has not been answered? The question was easy. I was asking about the distinction between personal comments by EXCO members and promotion of public policy. She has not answered my question. Let me be more specific. The smearing of scholarism, was it a government policy? There was no clarification made by the administration, so how can we make the distinction? Mr. Lee, I think the CS4A has already answered your question. Any supplement, CS4A? Mrs. Regina Ip. Thank you, President. Just now, the CS quoted from Articles 54 and 56 in explaining the functions of EXCO. However, there is a comment saying that the previous CEs would like to make use of the appointment to EXCO to form a political coalition so that he can secure votes at the LegCo, and therefore the appointments are made on this particular consideration. CS4A, is that one of the considerations? CS4A, thank you, President. As I said at the outset of my main reply, EXCO matters are the responsibilities of the CE, including appointments made to EXCO. So when the CE appoints individual members, I cannot really answer on his behalf what his considerations would be. But my understanding is that indeed, in this term of government, the CE would like all EXCO members to help him with their comments and views in order to make policies to improve governance. Ms. Claudia Mo, thank you, President. CS4A. With regard to Long May and also NENT development, you wouldn't say there would be fresh consideration by saying that there would not be public outcry or speculation, and then you have to say those are just your comments. Because in reality, your capacity, your role just do not allow you to speak your mind freely. The freedom of speech is not really equal to everyone in reality. Mr. Wong Yuk-man has already named the person. He has said that the EXCO member Cheung Chi-kong has written many articles and said many things. And my question is, given the structure and mechanism at EXCO, is it that every article, all the views by Cheung Chi-kong have been reviewed by EXCO? And if yes, can you confirm then he has not flouted the principle of collective responsibility? Mr. Po-chair, you have already said, President, that supplementaries are regulated by the rules of procedure. You should not allow members to repeatedly flout the ROP. I am aware of this, Mr. Po-chair. However, the ROP 25 says that, well, our understanding so far is that the mention of a name, if it is done so for making the content clearer, then it can be done. And I'm aware that the name has already appeared in previous questioning. And if I should forbid members from mentioning it, even if the members would say that EXCO member or that member it wouldn't make much of a difference. But Mr. Paul Chair's view is valid. So I'd like to ask members to be cautious. Ms. Claudia Mo, please come to your question quickly. My question is there a mechanism at EXCO to study or review Mr. Chen Chi-kwang's comments and articles to make sure that he has not flouted the principle of collective responsibility? If yes, would there be a public reprimand issued? Thank you. CS4A. Thank you, President. When I answered Mr. Wong Yuk-man's supplementary, I already said, and therefore I would say again, no. With regard to the individual comments made by EXCO members, if as long as they do not flout the principles of confidentiality and collective responsibility, if they should write articles or make comments in their other capacities, there is no mechanism to do monitoring of such. Ms. Mo, what's the problem? I'd like to follow up. No, sorry. You have to stand in the queue again if you want to ask a follow-up. Mr. Alan Leong. Is it then that if, as long as EXCO members do not flout the principles of confidentiality and collective responsibility, they are free to do whatever they want? Because earlier on, I heard the CS4A say that the CE might, with regard to certain behavior of EXCO members, he would be aware of that and he would handle it in an appropriate manner. So under the principles of confidentiality and collective responsibility, is it that as long as these are not flouted, there would be some requirements of EXCO members and the CE can act according to these requirements as to whether he will take action or not take action against certain behavior or act by EXCO members? CS4A, I must strictly point out here that in my main reply when I say that principles of confidentiality and collective responsibility should be observed, and the inference drawn by Mr. Alan Leung that therefore EXCO members can do whatever they want, I think there is a big distance between these two. Now, people in public office are monitored by the public and also they are regulated by our laws. We have common law. There is this misconduct in public office. And also we have the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance, and also there is the Declaration of Interest and Conflict of Interest consideration. So it is not that EXCO members can do whatever they want. Mr. Sin Chung Kai. President. Sorry, speaker not coming through. Thank you. We have to distinguish the views of an EXCO member, whether they are his individual views or whether he is promoting the government's policies. Just like what other members have said, the comments on scholarism, would that be a kind of government policy promotion, or is it that that the EXCO member was just saying whatever he wants to say? CS4A. Thank you, President. As I said when I answered another supplementary, the Hong Kong society, the Hong Kong public and media, I believe they have the ability to make the distinction. Now, when we view the views and comments made by EXCO members, we have also be aware of these members' other capacities in society, so that we can draw conclusions. Say, if he is a commentator while he is an EXCO member, but then another one is in charge of an important statutory organization, then we will understand whether his comments are in line with his other capacities. But all in all, we think we need to respect EXCO members' freedom of speech. We have spent over 23 minutes on this question. That's all for oral questions today.